to celebrate the upcoming Halloween. Mike put a large pumpkin on his head, but unexpectedly, the pumpkin was stuck as if it had been cursed. When the rescue team arrived at the scene, they had to hold back their laughter so hard that their faces were cramping. But saving Mike was urgent. With the pumpkin on his head, Mike could barely sit down without losing his balance. The captain ordered Buck to quickly fetch some lubricant. When the lubricant arrived, they thought the problem would be solved quickly, but when they tried to remove the pumpkin again, Mike's screams were like something out of a horror movie. The pumpkin was like a steel helmet welded to his head. Troy found the cause. Mike's neck had developed a rash, a clear sign of an allergic reaction. But his daughter said that her father had never been allergic to pumpkins, which was strange. It seemed that the bacteria from the rotten pumpkin had caused the allergy. If nothing unexpected happened, Mike's face would now be swollen like a pig's head. No wonder they couldn't get it off. However, just then, Mike suddenly pointed excitedly at the pumpkin, and the next second, he fell to the ground, his body shaking violently. Mike must have choked on the pumpkin flesh. If they didn't get the pumpkin off him, he would suffocate to death. Buck immediately grabbed a saw and carefully began cutting into the pumpkin. Everyone watched with bated breath. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. They peeled off the pumpkin skin and quickly used a suction device to remove the pumpkin flesh from Mike's mouth. Finally, Mike was out of danger. After thanking the rescue team, he couldn't help but laugh at himself for being so stupid, almost getting killed by a pumpkin. At this point, kind-hearted Buck comforted him, saying that he had seen even more stupid ways of getting injured. However, before Buck could finish speaking, he fell heavily to the ground. Fortunately, his arm was only dislocated and there were no serious injuries. But the aftermath of this absurd rescue left Buck trapped in a psychological nightmare worse than the pumpkin, because just 2 nights earlier, the fire department had organized a Halloween event for children. A mummy prop scared the children so much they dared not approach it. Buck reassured everyone that it was just a prop, not a real person. A little girl said she didn't like the dummy's arm, so Buck tore off his left arm. But the next second, his face turned pale because it was a real arm.
Oh my God, he's real! He's real!
The children were scared and ran away, which left Buck with a huge psychological shadow, because this mummy was borrowed from a Hollywood prop team, and it turned out to be a real human body. Buck now believes that his dislocated arm was caused by pulling off the corpse's left arm, cursing him with the corpse's curse. Buck investigated and discovered that the corpse had a very eventful history, having been borrowed by various places. It was first used in a grocery store, but the store was soon destroyed by a fire. It was then taken to an amusement park, but the park was soon destroyed by a hurricane. Finally, it was taken to a rodeo show, but not long after, the show was disrupted by a stampede. Buck said this with a straight face, and his friends were indeed amused by his story. Back home, Buck continued his online search and discovered that the mummified body had once been a bank robber. Due to the boils covering his skin, people had nicknamed him Billy Boils. Later, Billy's accomplices betrayed him to claim the reward money, tying him up and handing him over to the police. However, no one expected that Billy's 6 accomplices would all suddenly die violently. Doesn't this prove that Billy was someone not to be messed with? The next day, Buck found several boils on his face. Could he really have been cursed? His colleagues applied ointment, saying that many skin issues were caused by stress. Perhaps it was Buck's own wild imagination that caused it, and they bet him $5 that his face would be fine in 2 days. But 2 days later, the boils on Buck's face not only increased in number but also grew larger. Buck didn't want the money. He just wanted the boils to disappear. While Buck was still struggling with the boil curse, another emergency call brought the fire department back to reality. A 2-meter-long snake suddenly appeared in front of an infant, but her parents were enjoying a candlelit dinner in the restaurant. When the mother saw this on her phone monitor, she was terrified and immediately called for emergency help. The firefighters rushed in, quickly found the baby's room, and immediately picked up the child to check for injuries. At this point, the parents also rushed back and were relieved to see that their child was unharmed. They couldn't imagine what would have happened if the child had been bitten. At this point, the mother asked, "Where is the nanny?" With all the commotion in the house, the nanny hadn't shown up. Could she have been scared away by the snake? When the firefighters arrived at the laundry room and the basement, they were stunned by the scene before them. The nanny was lying unconscious on a snake blanket. It turned out that not long ago, a crack had appeared in the foundation of the villa, which had become a VIP passageway for snakes. The firefighters first used fire extinguishers to clear a path, spraying the snakes relentlessly. It must be said that this hardcore operation was enough to get anyone's adrenaline pumping. After clearing a path, they finally carried the nanny out on a stretcher. The couple looked at their mansion as if to ask, "Can we still sell this house?" Meanwhile, a man was injured by his pet and sought medical attention. The deep, bone-exposing wound led to a shocking discovery. There was a 400-pound Siberian tiger hiding in the apartment. Carter realized something was wrong and urged the man to reveal what he was keeping at home.
What do you have living in your apartment?
At the same time, the man's landlord arrived with the lease agreement, as he had been delinquent on 4 months of rent. Plus, He had been receiving complaints about a foul odor coming from the apartment. The landlord knocked on the door for a long time, but no one answered. However, she could hear movement inside, so she used a master key to open the door. But as soon as she entered, the landlord was stunned. Was this really a place for humans to live? Just then, a low growl came from behind her, and the landlord was so terrified that she lost her mind. The landlord hid in the bathroom, but one of her legs had already been scratched. She hurriedly dialed the emergency number. When the operator heard that the attacker was a tiger, she was stunned, thinking about how all this could happen in an apartment. At that moment, Carter arrived at the scene with a man. Carter was curious about how he had managed to bring a 400-pound Siberian tiger into an apartment. It turned out that the tiger was his pet since childhood, and he never expected it to turn on him. The man was worried about the tiger's safety but had forgotten about the landlady's condition. The fire department had arrived at the scene, located the room, and Troy grabbed a tranquilizer gun, ready to act. However, the landlady's condition was critical. Although she had bandaged her wounds, she was losing a lot of blood and felt her body growing colder by the minute. Troy tied a rope to himself and slowly descended from the top floor to the 8th floor. But after looking at the window for a long time, he couldn't see the big cat anywhere. He wiped the window, and the tiger suddenly lunged at him. Troy calmed himself down and slowly pried open a crack in the window while the tiger was distracted. The landlady heard the noise and instinctively reached for the door handle. The dispatcher realized she was about to go into shock and notified the fire department to hurry up and take action. Troy raised the tranquilizer gun and aimed at the tiger. Just then, the landlady, who was already unconscious, opened the bathroom door. In a moment of desperation, Troy fired the tranquilizer dart. Just as the tiger was 2 steps away from the landlady, it finally collapsed to the ground. The others rushed into the room to rescue her. Even more amazingly, before losing consciousness, the landlady muttered, "No pets allowed." But Willett's rescue story didn't end there. An even more difficult decision awaited him. A dog was barking at 2 little girls, who were trapped on the roof of a car and dared not come down. When the fire department arrived, they found that the dog was covered in blood, but it was not injured. Did the dog bite someone? The girls said that they had just left the bus stop and were on their way home when the dog suddenly rushed out and chased them. Seeing the dog that seemed to have gone mad, the firefighters didn't dare to approach it. But if they waited for the tranquilizer gun to arrive, it would take another 10 minutes. At that moment, the captain, who had always liked dogs, suddenly noticed that the dog's neck hair wasn't standing up. Its ears were drooping, and the way it was moving didn't look like it was about to attack. Instead, it looked scared and frightened. But what was it afraid of? So the captain cautiously approached and attracted the dog's attention. At the same time, the team members carried the girls off the bus, and the dog calmed down under the captain's reassurance. Noticing the dog's unusual behavior, the captain led his team to follow it, running all the way to a huge bone-cutting machine. At that moment, the dog suddenly became agitated, as if trying to communicate something. When everyone went to take a look, they saw that a person was trapped under the bone-cutting machine, his lower body pierced by the machine, unable to move. According to him, while he was working, a wheel got stuck, and he tried to clear it, but ended up getting crushed by the machine. Thanks to this dog, otherwise the old man would have been trapped in this vast, uninhabited field for who knows how long. Finally, with everyone's help, the old man was pulled out, but his legs had lost all feeling. It looked like compartment syndrome. If his legs weren't decompressed immediately, they might have to be amputated. The old man insisted that if he didn't make it, his son must come back and take the dog away. In the end, the old man's legs were saved, and the dog happily ran to its owner. But this was not the only bizarre rescue. What happened next was even more unexpected. A pair of twin brothers had an accident. The younger brother was choking on food and would soon suffocate. The older brother hurriedly called for emergency help, and the operator instructed him to perform CPR. Unexpectedly, the older brother said he couldn't do it because they were conjoined twins. The dispatcher finally understood and instructed the older brother to clear his brother's airway by inserting his fingers into his mouth and gently sweeping his throat with his fingers. The older brother followed the instructions, inserted his fingers into his brother's mouth, and soon felt something in his throat. When he pulled it out, it was a clump of peanut butter. The situation became even more critical, but the dispatcher remained calm. She instructed the older brother to look around for any hard objects, such as a chair or a handrail, as she needed them to perform abdominal thrusts. The older brother spotted the kitchen counter. He counted 1, 2, 3 inch aloud, and the two stood up together. However, the younger brother, struggling to breathe, grew weak and collapsed onto his brother after taking only a few steps. Unable to bear the weight, the older brother collapsed. Thinking his brother was dead, he couldn't help but cry out in grief. But the dispatcher told him that even if his brother had stopped breathing, he still had 3 minutes of golden rescue time. While the older brother was grieving, the calm and quick-thinking dispatcher came up with an idea. She asked them if they had a vacuum cleaner. The older brother looked around and found one, but how could he get it? With only 2 minutes left, encouraged by the dispatcher, the older brother dragged his brother's body forward inch by inch. Each time he moved, The older brother had to use all his strength. He didn't want to lose his brother, with whom he had lived for 34 years, and he suddenly found tremendous strength. Now they were only a step away from the vacuum cleaner. The older brother used all his strength to roll over, plugged in the vacuum cleaner, and attached the nozzle. But suddenly, he felt his brother's body grow cold. Was it too late? The dispatcher told him not to worry and to follow her instructions, slowly inserting the nozzle into his brother's mouth and turning the suction to maximum. Luckily, his brother survived. 34 years of conjoined life had allowed the brothers to unleash superhuman strength in the face of death, and the ordeal on their birthday finally allowed the brothers to resolve their differences. Just after this life-saving rescue, another race against time was underway. Emergency responder Willett arrived at the scene after receiving an emergency call but found that the victim, Jenny, had no vital signs. As they were preparing to handle the body, Jenny's sister burst in. She begged Willett to save Jenny's unborn child. Willett felt Jenny's abdomen and discovered that the fetus was still moving. He and his team immediately began performing CPR on Jenny to maintain blood flow to the fetus. However, after contacting the dispatch center, they were informed that the nearest doctor would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. Without medical assistance, the fetus risked suffocating from oxygen deprivation. Jenny pleaded with the paramedics to perform an emergency cesarean section, but Willett lacked the authority to perform such a procedure. Unauthorized medical intervention could result in the revocation of his license or even legal liability. At a critical moment, Willett risked his career to save the baby. He swiftly took a scalpel and performed an emergency cesarean section on Jenny. Soon, a baby girl was born. Though her pulse was weak, she was alive. However, the baby's face turned purple and she stopped breathing. The two immediately began CPR. Just as they were about to give up hope, the baby suddenly let out a loud cry. After being sent to the hospital, instead of receiving praise, Waylidi was notified that his emergency medical license had been revoked. The medical board's indifference left him feeling wronged and helpless. Upon returning to the fire department, the captain suggested he seek the intervention of a hospital authority. However, the authority admitted that the board's stance was firm, and unless a political heavyweight intervened, there was little hope. Waylidi felt utterly powerless, believing his career was over. Unexpectedly, Jenny's sister came to him with the child, wanting to express her gratitude. She exposed Willett's heroic act to the media and accused the committee of being heartless. Under public pressure, the committee, in an effort to maintain its image, ultimately revoked the punishment against Willett. These heart-pounding rescue stories are just a glimpse of the countless rescue scenes in emergency rescue. Every time the sirens wail, there are those who risk their lives to protect others, bringing a glimmer of hope to those in despair.